Okay, everybody, thank you for joining us again here at the My Metabolic Life podcast channel. I have the distinct pleasure of really getting to know somebody today who I've only casually known online for a number of years now. Jeff Sears joining us today, and Jeff has a really incredible story, a transformation story, a medical reversal story, things like that I like to highlight on this channel, because for me, this channel is creating awareness that these conditions that we've been told are chronic progressive conditions aren't, that we do know what the cause of these things are, even though the doctors, yet most of them do not know and understand this. And so that's where we need to get this message out so we can educate the doctors on what's missing in their education and help them make it so easy to help so many more of their clients. So without further ado, Jeff, thank you so much for joining me here today. I understand you've got quite a bit of a story, and it goes quite a ways back. I'll let you decide where you want to jump in and what you want to share, and we'll go back and forth through time. But please share your kind of metabolic epiphany and change in your health and life.
Okay, first off, Brett, thank you for inviting me here. I really appreciate it. Let me just say before I start that might shock some people. I've lost a lot of weight, and briefly, most of the weight that I lost, of the total of 175 pounds, did not come via a low-carb ketogenic diet.
Mm-hmm.
I knew nothing about a carb or a protein or fat, except that you weren't supposed just don't eat any fat. But anyway, I was able to lose 163 pounds approximately in 15 months, just following what's called a whole food plant-based diet,
Mm-hmm.
off of a book written by an ADA doctor called Neil Barnard.
Yep.
That's what I basically followed. I actually had a notebook, tracked everything. And anyway, now I'll tell the story, but going from that helped me to lose 163 pounds. But once I was hit with a autoimmune liver disease and type 2, I put my liver autoimmune disease and my diabetes in full remission via the mechanisms of a very low carbohydrate diet. Okay, so we'll just go back quickly a little bit, like more to the beginning.
Sure.
I was born in 1960, and like President Dwight Eisenhower had a stroke in like 55. Then Ansel Keys started running his mouth. And then this fear of red meat, saturated fat, eggs, and cholesterol. Oh my God. My father, who had angina and his first heart attack at a very young age, and his father had a massive heart attack at 64, same age that I am today.
Yep.
He developed up a massive heart attack. And then what my father went through at a young age, he really lived in fear of all the things I just said. Red meat, saturated fat, eggs, cholesterol. I mean it, I'm talking serious fear. So he more or less raised us like that, at a fairly early age. And anyway, I started working at a very young age in the woods of far northern Maine. That's where I lived. my father was a wood contractor and a potato farmer. And back then we used to cut the trees down with a chainsaw, fell the branches with a chainsaw, cut the wood in 4-foot long sections, and load it by hand in small piles. And then come with, it was called the Bombardier J5. It was like a mini bulldozer on rubber legs
Yep.
with a 12-foot trailer behind it. And we'd come with that and we'd load the 4-foot pulpwood by hand onto the trailer of that Bombardier J5 with a pulp hook, that would hold like a cord and a quarter of pulpwood, drive that down to the yard, unload it by hand in stacks of 4-foot tall, and we'd just keep on going. Then a pulp truck with a grapple would come and load it onto the truck. Anyway, I started doing that at a very young age. At the age of about 17 years, at the age of around 12, 13 years old, I weighed about 200 pounds. Today, I probably weigh 175, 180. I stay in there. But anyway.
How tall are you, Jeff?
6'1".
Okay.
So anyway, my parents sent myself and my 2 sisters to a local Weight Watchers in our town. This is like in 1972, right, 73. And I followed that diet and I lost about 50 pounds. That's the first time I lost weight, but I put it all back. At the age of about 17 years old, I weighed, it's too bad I didn't have a picture to show you, but I used to weigh like 345 pounds.
I have your Facebook profile up, so later at the end of the story, we can bring up the picture if you don't mind me sharing it.
The picture, yes, that's fine. But the one I'm talking about at 17 years old, I don't think it's in there.
Okay.
That's in 2007. And then
this is one in a blue T-shirt that you've got on.
Yeah, it's fine if you want to show. Anyway, so then my father bought a machine shop. So I started working at a young age in a machine shop. We used to build farm machinery for potato farmers, and we used to work on trucks with transmissions and drive shafts. Anyway, eventually I was fully trained in being a metal fabricator, metal machinist, welder. And would also make like the blueprints to build the farm machinery. Anyway, so time goes on. Then through a period of about 7 years, from October 1997 to January of 2004, I went through a series of 3 different major back and neck surgeries. The first one was in October of 97. I had lumbar degenerative disc disease and severe spinal stenosis, which is usually found like in an 85-year-old man. And I was like 37 years old. So eventually what happened, because I kept on working, even through all that pain, and I had a hard time, but kept on working. Didn't go to doctors back then. As a kid, we never went to doctors. Unless a person broke a leg or broke an arm or something like that.
Right.
But, and I was raised like that. So I just fought through a lot of pain. And I kept on working, and it got to the point that it didn't make any sense anymore. I knew that they would give me, I would go to a local clinic and they'd give me shots of Demerol in high doses, and it wouldn't do anything. I'd had to sleep on the floor on the rug at night, try to sleep, sitting in a position where excruciating pain. So anyway, my wife had ended up having to drive me down to southern Maine, where I live now, to go see a surgeon. And he had to run all the tests, MRI, then a nerve conduction study, where they drive needles.
Sure.
They have to match where the damage is to the MRI. So after that's all done, it's like 2:00 in the afternoon. And this doctor said, this neurosurgeon, he said, "Mr. Sear, come in. Are you okay? Please have a seat." And I could tell he was treating me totally different than when I first walked in there. So he said, "Mr. Sear, we have to do surgery on you." So I'm thinking, okay, we're going to set it up and I'll come back in a couple of weeks or a month. He says, "No, Mr. Sear, we're going to have to operate on you tomorrow morning at 7:30. We have to do an emergency laminectomy infusion. You have severe stenosis where all of your spinal column is being compressed from all the pressure to the point that it's going to sever all the nerves.
Oh,
We have to do this tomorrow morning at 7:30. Okay. What do you want me to do? So anyway, they did the surgery, and that was the first one, October 1997. So I was out of commission for quite a few months. So ended up losing that machine shop. Losing our house. I've never said this before, but there's a lot more to it. I really can't get into, but
sure.
the end result of that is I had to move. I had to find another job away. So I ended up started to work at Bath Iron Works in southern Maine, where they make Navy destroyers,
Okay.
as a welder. They had to do all the, I had to show them the papers, the medical part from my neurosurgeon and all that stuff. They had to run tests with their own specialists, a series of, to make sure that
You could do it. Sure. Yeah.
they did all that. Anyway, I started working for them, Bath Iron Works. Now, I was a welder on the ships themselves, inside, So this is from 1998 through 2004. Through that period, I had 2 more surgeries from accidents at work. In May of 2001, I turned a corner on the ship, walking pretty fast, and there's a bunch of big pipes in the overhead. So I turned the corner going pretty fast, snapped my head back, ruptured C4, C5, and C6 in the cervical. So I had to have fusion and a plate with titanium screws and rods, a total fusion. That's why you see me, you notice how I'm tilted forward with my head, and you might see me do this sometimes here.
Yeah.
Well, I can barely go back, and I'm like locked into that. Anyway, then a couple of years later, that takes us now to like the fall of 2003. I had my final injury in the mid back section, T11, T12. So they had to do a laminectomy infusion, titanium rods, titanium plates and screws. So now I was all fused up pretty much from my lower back all the way up to my neck. Then the workers' compensation board, the doctors, and I had to go to court and all that stuff. And they all put me totally disabled, permanently and totally disabled, which started in October of 2003. But anyway, so at that point, like during those years there from, like the 90s through 2003, I always weighed like, I don't know, like between 260, 270. So obviously, I was in a lot of severe pain from all that.
Mm-hmm.
They had started me a few years before on drugs, but now with all this severe pain, they went to oxycodone,
Mm-hmm.
OxyContin, Cadigan, which is oral morphine.
Mm-hmm.
So I started taking heavy doses of oral morphine. Got addicted to it because that's how it works. Like someone that shoots heroin.
Yep.
Anyway. Did this for a few years, and I became severely depressed because I had worked hard all my life at these physical jobs. So
Yep.
I'm on a commission. Anyway, all what I've explained so far with these surgeries, the end result, I could no longer lay on my back or lay on my side, could not lay down in bed to sleep. I had to sleep in a lazy boy recliner. That's all I could do. Pretty much, just to make it simple, from that point there of 04, January,
Yep.
I became frozen. What I mean by that, I was pretty much locked in a chair, might as well say 24 hours a day. I'm still like that now. I still can't lay down on my back or my side. I have to sleep in a lazy boy chair. I can do small tasks around the house.
Mm-hmm.
It'll take me a lot longer than it would you, let's say. And, for exercise, I have to use a stationary bike. But anyway, so I fell into a big depression, addicted to oral morphine. I had started smoking at a fairly young age, let's say 15, 16 years old. Then I was probably smoking like 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes a day,
Mm-hmm.
But then during this period, nothing to do and in severe pain and sitting in a chair, started smoking more. I was smoking probably like 4 packs of cigarettes a day, oral morphine, Cadigan. At that point, I weighed like probably 345 pounds. I was pretty messed up, depressed, couldn't work anymore. That was the biggest thing bugging me. I couldn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when I would sit in my lazy boy chair, if I wanted to get up out of my chair, I had to use a cane because I weighed 345 and I'm all fused up. I have a hard time getting up out of my chair now. I need help. But back
Mm-hmm.
then, at 345, I had to use a cane like I'm in my chair, and I'd have a cane that I would walk with. So I had to put the cane on the floor to help to lift me out of the chair. Well, by doing that, I ended up getting a hernia.
Mm.
So anyway, I had to have hernia surgery, which is fine. They had to do post-op blood work before. I went for that. The lab called me. The doctor that was going to do the surgery, Mr. Sear, we can't do the surgery on, it was supposed to be like around April 8th, let's say, the April 8th of 2005. This is
Mm-hmm.
2005. So we need for your blood sugar, you told me you're type 2 diabetic, you have an A1C of 12%, which is actually an average blood sugar if you use the correct mathematical formula for the conversion of A1C to average blood glucose, which, by the way, the ADA changed that in 2008. But the correct formula, it's called the DCCT formula. That was always used prior to 008. But anyway, so I had an A1C of 12%, which is an average blood sugar of 349. And my fasting sugars are like 300, 320. So they told me I need to go to a doctor, which I didn't have. And I never had a primary care, you know. So went to the doctor who also took care of type 2 diabetics. He looked at my information and he said, well, Mr. Sear, welcome, more or less welcome to the club. Type 2 diabetes is a progressive disease. Nothing can be done. It's only going to get worse. Eventually, you'll end up on using insulin. I knew, keep in mind, I knew zero, totally clueless about anything to do with metabolic processes, type 2 diabetes, and on. Zero. Okay. Then he says, I'm going to write you a script for metformin, it was like 2,000 milligrams a day, and Avandia. What Avandia does, it makes your fat cells more sensitive. So it takes the glucose and converts it to fat in your fat cells. You end up getting fatter. But anyway, so I take that. And then he says to me, I'm going to send you to, we have a local hospital here. I'm going to send you to go see the ADA nutritionist in charge of all this stuff at the hospital. She's going to tell you what and how to eat. So I went there. She told me what to do, what to eat, eat 6 times a day. It was a very high carb diet. I mean, probably like 70% carbohydrate, but it's a lot of starches and, potatoes and stuff that rapidly converts to sugar.
Yeah.
So I followed that, kept on going and stuff. So one day I had a big epiphany. I went to the grocery store with my wife, and back then I either had to use a walker or a cane to walk. And when I'd go and took me a while to get to get into the grocery store. Whenever I went anywhere like that, I had to use one of those handicap carts
Sure.
to get someone. It's the only way I could do it. So I get out, we park in the parking lot, I get out of the car with my wife, and across the way I see a man, probably in his mid-50s. He gets out of his car and he gets an oxygen tank, and I see tubes going, and he has an oxygen tank. Then it just hit me all of a sudden.
Yep.
Jeff, here you are, the condition you're in, you have a hard time doing anything. You need a cane or a walker to walk. If you keep on going down this route, how are you going to do that? How are you going to use a cane with one hand and then get your oxygen tank and pull that? Jeff, this is not going to work. But
Yep.
I saw that and boom. So anyway, This is the early summer of 2008. After that episode,
Yep.
then I started thinking. Because another thing too is from that morphine and that smoking, you have a really hard time breathing. And I sleep at night in my chair, and my wife would hear me through the night, how I had a hard time gasping for air. And she'd wake up and she more or less told me, if you don't change your ways, one of these days I'm going to get up out of bed and I'll find you dead. And that too of course, this was around the same time.
Yep.
So anyway, I started thinking about all these things. I need to do something, but I knew I had quite a few things to overcome. I knew I couldn't do it all at once. So first I said, I'm going to quit smoking, cold turkey. October 1, hold on a minute here. I'm
It's all good.
I'm sorry, I'm living on a part. Okay, 2008, that what I just told you, the man with the oxygen.
Yep.
I knew changes had to come, but so then, damn it, April of 2009. Okay, so
All good.
October 1, 2008, I quit smoking cold turkey. Boom. So then, after about 2 months, then I said, okay, Jeff, now we're quitting oral morphine, but we're doing it cold turkey. Because these pain management doctors always tell you when you're on these heavy drugs, don't ever think of quitting this stuff on your own. It's kind of like a heroin addict.
Sure.
So anyway, I never told my pain management doctor what I was doing. So this is like November, December, like late December, early January of 2009. Quit oral morphine cold turkey. I go through all those withdrawals that a heroin addict goes through. But I just put it in my head, I have to do this. So I did that. So then I knew I needed, like I said, locked in a chair, frozen.
Yep.
I knew there had to be something I could do for exercise to get my heart rate up, use energy. So we had a local Planet Fitness. The very beginning of April, I walked into the gym. I looked what they had, and I saw that they had these recumbent stationary bikes. So then I'm leaving out the part where in the beginning of January, I also read that book that I talked about earlier by that ADA doctor, Neil Barnard.
Yep.
Saw it at the grocery store, and the title was like Reverse Diabetes or something like that. Bought that book, started reading it. Basically, it's a whole food plant-based diet. Then I went to the gym. The first day I was 2 minutes on the bike at a pretty low intensity, obviously. So started keeping a diary, exactly what I ate, and also the minutes and what I did on that bike. And I kept track of that, slowly building up on the bike. Then I learned about different training with a heart rate monitor. Started learning about different muscle fibers, type 1, slow twitch, type 2, and two-way super fast. Started educating myself about that stuff, heart rate training. Then, anyway, I slowly built up on the bike. Took a while. Then I went to a higher intensity. Then I read a program called Sprint 8, which is HIIT training interval on a bike. Started learning about all this stuff and kept on going. And my clearance of lactate I was able to clear lactate much quicker. My resting heart rate was 100 prior to starting any exercise. And by the end of what I'm explaining, I got my resting heart rate down to like 48, 50. But anyway, so I started doing all this stuff, and I think I'm doing great. My blood sugar's coming down, and so it took me about 15 months, lost 163 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
So 15 months, that brings us the beginning of April of 2009.
Yep.
15 months. So I think we're into 2011. Beginning of 2011, let's say. Yeah. Early 2011. I go for an annual checkup at my primary care. I had one now. So I get my A1C was 6.1. So my primary care, a female doctor, she was ecstatic. She said, they wrote in my notes, patient no longer has type 2 diabetes. You're doing great, Jeff. Your A1C is 6.1. Again, I knew zero about type 2 diabetes. So I thought that was great.
Mm-hmm.
So keep on like that. A couple months later, hold on. Whoa. They measured my liver enzymes, like they do, ALT, AST.
Yep, ALT, okay.
And then she went further. She checked GGT.
Yep.
And then they called me up and said, Jeff, you have certain liver enzymes that are very elevated. So I'm going to make an appointment for you with a gastroenterologist so they can do further testing on you. Okay? Go to the gastroenterologist. They run more blood work on all your liver function test. Then she says, I want to do an ultrasound.
Yep.
Do an ultrasound. She gets those results. I want to do a CAT scan of the liver. Okay. Now I want to do an MRI of the liver. Okay. So this took a couple months there. Then finally she says, Mr. Sear, I think you have an autoimmune liver disease that's called primary sclerosing cholangitis. So, but she doesn't explain, Anyway, and she says to confirm it, because I think it's in the very early stages. The final thing we have to do to actually confirm that, we need to do a liver biopsy. That's when they drive this needle so long
Right
into
in.
the area of the liver,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of sample. So then I have to wait for those results. Then, like a week later or so, maybe 2 weeks, I don't know. She calls me back in the afternoon. I'll never forget that. Mr. Sear, I need to see you tomorrow morning at my office. Okay. So then I went in and she told me, it's confirmed you have this autoimmune liver disease called primary sclerosing cholangitis. You're in the very, very early stages. And I says, okay, what does this do, this primary? She says, basically what it is the bile ducts in your liver become inflamed, start to close up, bile can't flow through. It's a very slow process. They can go 8 to 10 years, some up to 20 years.
Okay.
Depending on, and what it does, those bile ducts, they narrow, they're inflamed, bile can't go through. But the final outcome of all that, if it progresses to the end, it causes cirrhosis of the liver, to the point that you end up needing to get a total liver transplant. So that's what she told me. I said, okay. I said, I thought there must be a treatment plan for that. Is there anything that can be done? No, there's nothing that can be done. The only thing we do is every 6 months is monitor all your liver enzymes. And then as it progresses down the road, when these bile ducts in your liver get closed enough, we have to put stents through that to try and open it back. And that, I said, like, is there any medications? Not really at that time there. So that hit me really weird. It's like, I says, how about, is there like a change in diet that could help? No. All that really can be done is what I just explained to you. So in my mind at that point, she was more or less sending me home to sit back in my lazy boy chair, let the years go by until it's time for a liver transplant.
But okay, so let me just kind of.
Sure.
So you've been now at this point. So you've lost 160 some pounds going
No.
whole food, plant based.
Yeah.
And how long were you into that when this liver diagnosis came through?
So I started the diet like April 9 of 2009.
Yeah.
So I lost all that weight, took like 15 months. So now what I'm explaining here with the liver biopsy and all that there, that's in the fall of 2011.
Okay. So
When I got the,
later.
when I got the official diagnosis was very early November 2011.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I still knew nothing about diabetes and insulin and glucose. I knew zero, okay? Just a common layperson off the street, used to doing hard physical labor. I knew zero.
Yeah.
Except the parts about what I explained about HIIT training and heart rate. Anyway.
Yep.
So after she told me that, I went home. It did throw me back. It did knock me back for a split second. But then I said, whoa. After everything I've just done to try and change my life, I need to find what I can do for autoimmune diseases. I've got to dig into that a little bit. So anyway, I really didn't know how to use a computer that great back then. My wife taught me how to use a computer. So I started looking into autoimmune diseases. I land on these different sites. Somehow, I don't know how, but I landed on, his name is Dr. Ron Rosedale.
Yeah.
On his website. And the first article that I read about any of this stuff was insulin and its metabolic effects. Rosedale gave a talk on that paper like in 1993 for the first time. So anyway, I read that, but I'm trying to explain is that that's like the first research paper or anything that I read.
Mm-hmm.
So then I kept digging further and further and further and further, really deep. But then, well, hold on. As I started reading this stuff, I started learning that this is a very low carb diet they want you to do.
Yep.
Almost no carbohydrates. And I was terrified of fat, saturated fat, the way that I was brought up. I mean, when you say
All
something,
of us.
yeah, I mean, super terrified. So, you talk about getting a. So I thought, this is nuts. But back then, when I first started looking into this, there wasn't that much talk about like online, like Volek and Finney, their first book came out in 2011.
Yep.
I read that book when it came out, and then I read their second book and when it came out. And then what I'm getting at is, read that one first. But anyway, and I read Dr. Bernstein's Solution back around the same time also. But anyway, they were telling me I had to do pretty much the opposite what to eat to have a healthy life prior. So I really had to look into that. And back then, when you started looking into that, like if you punch ketogenic diet, it was all bad stuff based off of diabetic ketoacidosis from a type 1.
Yep.
Doesn't make any insulin. Anyway, it was all negative stuff. And which a lot of people would read that and they would say, fuck the hell with this. I'm not doing that. They'd be
Yep.
scared. They'd be scared shitless. And they'd probably stop there. But I'm not made like that. I look at both sides and I want to know as much as I can. Kept on going further and further and further and further. I had to do that there. Keep digging. This is how terrified I was of ketones and saturated. I had to do that there, digging further and further and deeper for 1 full year. Then I talked about it a little bit to my wife, and she said she thought I was crazy. Anyway, after a year, I said, the hell with this. My daughter's birthday is the 1st of November, 2012, and that's when I started. So at that point, the lowest A1C I ever had was 6.1. After about a year on this diet, I was able to get it to 4.9. Anyway, I still had to go every 6 months for my liver enzymes, liver function test. That slowly, after 6 months, it was a little bit better. It got better and it got better. 6 more months, it got better. It got better. Took a couple of years, probably. I'm going to say 2 to 3 years to have my liver enzymes normal, like an ALT of 15 and an AST of 18 and a GGT of 11, fasting triglycerides of 35. When I was prior to low carb diets, my HDL was 29, triglycerides 250. So now, and they've been like this for a long time now, my fasting triglycerides are always, let's say, between 30, 35, up to 45 have been the highest. My HDL ranges between 90 to 105. So anyway, it took 2 to 3 years. My liver enzymes pretty much all normalized.
Mm-hmm.
Kept on going to the gastroenterologist. Then after a while, they said, Mr. Sear, we'll do the liver function test once a year now. That gastroenterologist never asked me one time what I was doing different. I never said anything because I knew at that point that I'd just probably be asked, "Are you crazy?" So anyway, I never said a word.
Yep.
But then I know she had to have wondered what's going on here. But today, even my total bilirubin, which is a sign of jaundice, yellowing of the eyes, the clearance of bilirubin when your bile ducts close like that. Anyway, I had a very high total bilirubin. Now it's totally normal, like 0.6, 0.7. So actually, after a few years of going to that gastroenterologist, after I'll say like 5 years, we don't have to see you anymore. Have your liver enzymes checked once a year when you go to your primary. And that's what I did. So anyway, I need to add that earlier when I said I probably on 6 or 7 different occasions have lost in the past between 50, 75, 100 pounds. I always regain it all back and more. So I've only been able to maintain my weight and everything else I've said, but my weight, because the way that I eat controls my hunger. Basically, I'm never hungry.
Was that the case during your your whole food plant-based world too? Was your hunger conquered there?
No. That never cured my hunger. I had to white knuckle that through that period that I was doing that,
Mm-hmm.
where I've been at this weight now since 163, then now it's like 175 to 180 that I lost. Anyway, for like 11 or 12 years, I've maintained this weight loss. I stay there.
Yep.
But that's via the mechanisms of a very low carb keto diet, animal protein. My hunger cues are the crosstalk between the hormones, the gut and brain. That's normalized. Leptin, ghrelin. So I can follow, people say it's hard to follow this diet. I'm just being honest. I'm the type of a guy that I always eat the same foods, very simple. And I could eat like steak and eggs if I wanted to, which I don't because I live with my wife. And anyway, I could eat steak and eggs like every meal. I do eat a few fibrous, low carb veggies, not a lot. I eat maybe, 10 to 15 grams of carbohydrate per day.
Sure.
But I'll be 65 here in a few months. Hopefully, it'll continue to go the way that's been going, and
Let me touch on something that you mentioned.
I'm sure you have questions.
Well, a couple of them, but so you were able to, first of all, congratulations, and I appreciate how hard quitting the smoking and getting off of the painkillers all at one time, cold turkey had to be. You had
it wasn't all at one time, though. It was,
but
between October to, anyway, yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
But then you'd also mention kind of that a depression sank in because of the back surgery and living in the chair and all of these things. Were you ever on medications for the depression?
No.
Okay. Is the depression still a part of your life, or if that resolved, when did that happen?
Zero depression. So it'd be kind of the opposite of that.
Yeah. And when did that resolve? Did that resolve during the weight loss, or was that more of a low carb type of a thing, just like your appetite changed?
Just my nature, the way that I'm made. I'm just geared that way where, you know, at a very young age, you're taught mental toughness and that doesn't hurt. And you keep on going no matter what. And that was instilled in me at a very young age. And anyway, just that nature, I think, helped me a lot there. Because I'm not trying to be arrogant, but
No.
how I should say it is something that might be painful and hard for somebody else. In my mind, I'll really question that why is that so painful to you, or why are you having such a hard time, which is probably not right of me, but it's hard to explain the way a person thinks, the way he was
Mhm.
brought up, and what's instilled in them. You can't really compare that to someone else.
Sure.
Like,
I was just trying to focus in on, was there a time where you noticed it was gone? And
well,
what
like
do you
brain fog,
correlate with?
of course, like I always say, the human brain is one hungry bastard. And by that, I mean, like baseline metabolism, like while you sleep overnight. You've got blood sugars 80, 90, 100. Normal baseline metabolism. About 60% of that glucose in the blood that comes from the liver, about 60% goes to the brain.
Yep.
Okay?
Hmm.
So the brain, it needs fuel every second of every minute. The brain only stores about 1 to 2 minutes worth of glucose at a time.
Yep.
When you become insulin resistant and so on, you've got a hard time keeping that amount of energy that you need to make ATP
Yep.
to supply all what's needed every second of every minute. So you get a lot of brain fog. And of course, that is now gone. Brain now is crystal clear. So crystal.
Hmm.
So that hums along. Of course, that's from a combination of glucose and some ketones.
Absolutely. Yep.
I'm not saying you have to like start chasing these crazy high ketone levels.
Mm-mm.
I think people should view that more like, you have to target in on every different cell, but like in the liver, if you're mainly running the glucose pathway, glycolysis,
Yep. Yep.
aerobic glycolysis, just the breakdown of glucose, or if you're running the liver cells to make their energy in the mitochondria, if you're using fatty acids for beta oxidation. So
Yep.
the liver is going to be one of those two. Like in the muscles, it's a little bit different. You switch
Yep.
between glucose and fatty acids depending on your, um, like if I'm sitting down talking to you right
Hmm.
now, my muscles are burning primarily fatty acids. Fatty acids that circulate in your blood, they're long chain fatty acids
Yep.
bound to the blood protein albumin.
Hmm.
So, in order for those long chain fatty acids to enter into the mitochondria, to be then broken apart and converted to acetyl CoA, which is the molecule that enters into Krebs to start
Yep.
it. You can get that from pyruvate, you can get that from glucose aerobic metabolism or from these long chain fatty acids. But the enzymes, CPT1, CP2, that are needed to let the long chain fatty acids enter into the mitochondria to undergo beta oxidation. In order, if you eat glucose load or glucose insulin goes up, it shuts off CPT1, CPT2. So in your liver, you can't run the glucose pathway to make in the mitochondria and the beta oxidation at the same time.
Right.
It's one or the other.
Randall cycle is going to dictate one or the other.
Your substrate complex, the acetyl-CoA, the molecule that's made, that's needed to enter into Krebs, to then make the NADH, make the coenzymes that carry the electrons, hydrogen, to the electron transport chain. There's only one acetyl-CoA that enters into Krebs at that starting point there.
Yep.
There's not both. So most folks are running around today running a glucose-based metabolism for everything.
Absolutely.
The brain is fully dependent 100% on that glucose molecule, aerobic glycolysis, pyruvate, then to acetyl-CoA, and then to ATP.
Yep.
Anyway, if you're running that metabolism, you're addicted to that, yeah, you're going to need about 120 grams of carbohydrate per day to make the energy for the brain. About 23% of your total resting energy expenditure is Jeff sitting down in a chair. It's to feed the brain. The brain is one hungry bastard.
Yes, it is.
The only supply of glucose is what the liver dumps into the bloodstream. That you're using about 60% of that blood sugar level in the brain. So yeah, 120 grams of carbohydrate, that's like times 4. Like 480 calories worth just to keep the lights on.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's every second. So you end up having what's called brain hypometabolism.
Yep.
You have an energy crisis. Give me some glucose.
Absolutely. Well,
Anyway,
there's so much.
Too much information that I needed, probably, but anyway.
Have you come across the YouTube channel called The Metabolic Mind and spent any time on that?
You talking about Dom's?
Not Dom.
Agostino?
No,
Are you talking about Brett Shear? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
Brett's now for the last 2 years been with Metabolic Mind. We love Diet Doctor. Yes.
Yes, I have. I watch all kinds of podcasts. I love to learn all kinds of things. I've watched Brett. I've watched Dom. I followed Dom for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Did a lot of his research paper. But I'm not trying to change the subject, but I just wanted to talk about something.
Sure, go. You go.
Diabetics, all diabetics are so badly treated.
Oh, yeah.
Mistreated. Like, I have a niece. She got diagnosed type 1 when she was 12. Her father had to carry her to the hospital. She was in DKA. She had a blood sugar of 966. He brought her there just in time. So this is like, she was 12. I don't know, like 30 years ago, let's say. And you have to keep in mind that these endocrinologists take care of these type 1s. They take care of thousands of type 1s. And I understand, like, doctors are handcuffed. So they also think, though, that you need to follow a high-carb diet because they're afraid your blood glucose will go too low. And just a quick note, in type 1 diabetics, a lot of times the glucagon producing alpha cell in the pancreas, it doesn't hear the proper signal from the glucose level. So, like usually, insulin and glucagon, they're partners for life. So,
Yep. Yin and
like
yang.
normal glucose homeostasis, let's say 80, it says officially 70 to 110, but let's say 80 to 100. So you always have a basal release phase of insulin and glucagon. They both, they sense the blood sugar concentration. So when blood sugar reaches a certain level, you'll secrete a little bit more basal or a little bit insulin, or a little bit more glucagon. So the biggest problem with type 1 diabetics, and a lot of people don't know this, the alpha cells in the pancreas do not hear the glucose concentration properly in the alpha cell. So when your blood sugar actually gets down to like 68, that's when glucagon really, it goes up. So the liver can release stored glycogen into glucose. Anyway, the alpha cell doesn't hear that. You have counter-regulatory hormones that if the blood sugar keeps on dropping below 68, like I might be off a hair on the number, but between 55 to 57, these other hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, kick into high gear. So what happens with a type 1? If you give them a glucagon shot directly, that glucagon is going to work. But the alpha cell in the pancreas, what I just explained, will not respond when it should, when that blood sugar gets down to 68, to have an even higher release of glucagon. It will not respond, keep lowering, counter-regulatory stress hormones kick in. If that doesn't work, now when blood sugar gets down to like 40 there, so now we're talking danger because, like I said prior, the brain, for the brain to run on all circuits, if your blood sugar goes down to 40, only about 60% of that, I'd have to figure it out, is what you have in the brain. So you've got a big crisis now. Okay? So anyway, her father, coming back to my niece, her father brought her to the emergency room. They checked all that. She was in DKA, blood sugar of 966. Anyway, he saved her life by bringing her there. So they bring him to a type 1 diabetic doctor, endocrinologist. They're giving an eating plan. They meet with all these people, and they're told to eat it's a high carbohydrate diet. A lot of starches, fast-acting carbohydrate. These type 1s, a lot of them, well, first of all, they make a little bit of insulin, tiny, tiny bit. Some none, but some a tiny bit. Like the human body, it makes insulin and stores insulin as pre-proinsulin. Then it stores it as proinsulin. And like me, let's say, your pancreas stores a certain amount of that proinsulin, like on a shelf, a certain amount. So that's ready. So when the glucose load gets high enough, it hits the pancreas, and now that activates a quick release. First phase, it's called first phase insulin release. Mm-hmm. And you have only so much stored of that on that shelf. Your pancreas is also constantly, like every 5 minutes or so, releasing basal secretion. That's like totally separate from what I'm explaining with that first phase
Sure.
release to the signal to the pancreas from the glucose level. So if you don't have that first phase release, it's powerful. And it's there to knock down glucose. But what it does too is it inhibits, fatty acid release from your fat cells. And it instantly also tells the liver, we've got a bunch of glucose coming in now. So you need to stop making glucose and storing it. So now that incoming glucose, we need to store it.
Yeah.
And then the muscle cells think of a, anyway, I won't get into all that. We could talk for a long time. I can explain all these things, but I don't want to confuse people. But anyway, that type 1 diabetic, they're given this program to eat at a young age, 11, 12, 13. Their parents don't know any of what I just told you. Who's he going to listen to? I was brought up to listen to authority figures, and I'm not saying this to be mean or demeaning. A doctor in a white coat, that's authority to me. Well, it was authority before I knew better, but anyway, I would believe anything that a doctor would have told me. I thought they knew about all this. Anyway, that type 1 diabetic doctor's got 3,000 patients. He certainly doesn't want to get sued. And even if he would understand how to implement a low-carb diet properly, make believe he does know that, which most don't. But if he would, damn it, I could explain to somebody what to do. But if they don't do it the way it should be done, after everything I've told you about hypoglycemia from glucagon and all that stuff, I'd be afraid to try and explain that to the father of a 12-year-old type 1. Even if he knew that, and he wouldn't they need to follow standard of care guidelines. And it says X, X, and X, the 88 high carb diet, blah, blah, blah. They do this, and then they start activating they run A1Cs of 7 to 8 to 9.
Yep.
The polyol pathway, which is a
Yep.
pathway that runs alongside the glycolysis pathway. It's like
Yep.
a buffer. Anyway, these people don't know about the polyol pathway. All the mechanisms and action of polyol in the liver starts a cascade, let's say a cascade of actions that do all the damage to your kidney cells, your eye cells, your nerve cells. And it's not because of a blood sugar of 200. That blood sugar level of 200 is not doing the actual damage to the kidney cell. That's how I should say it. But most people don't understand. Basal glucose metabolism, meaning 2, 3, or 4, or 5 hours after you eat a meal and it's all the energy is all put away, you're back to running off of glucose, free fatty acids. Your blood sugar is 80 to 100. I call that normal baseline metabolism. Under those conditions, most of the glucose transport in the system, insulin's not really, I'll put it this way, the glucose transporters, GLUT1, which is present on all cells, primarily for basal metabolism.
Yep.
As the blood sugar lowers, these GLUT1 receptors become more expressed, and they can. So GLUT1, and you have GLUT2, which is primarily in your beta cells some kidney cells, and pancreas. GLUT1 senses the glucose concentration, works on a concentration gradient. It's non-insulin dependent. Let me say that again. No insulin needed. Although insulin never goes to zero, you have a basal baseline insulin, 5, 6 units, 7 units. But anyway, it works on a concentration gradient in these cells that I'm talking about.
Yep.
Kidney, eye, nerve cells, diabetic neuropathy,
Mm-hmm.
diabetic retinopathy, cataracts, kidney disease. Anyway, if your blood sugar level is 180 on the outside of the cells, it's 180 inside these cells that I'm talking about, which cause most of the complications of diabetes. Okay? Keep in mind, GLUT1, GLUT2 also, they're non-insulin dependent glucose transporter. The glucose transporter, 1 and 2, it's bidirectional, meaning the GLUT1 receptor on the cells opens both ways. So it allows the glucose in, allows glucose out. Your blood sugar in those cells is 200. It's the same thing inside those cells. So we don't have glucose, we don't have insulin trying to shove glucose into a kidney cell. That's not happening. Okay? People need to back up those that are saying that. GLUT4 needs insulin because GLUT4 on your muscle cells,
Yep.
your fat cells, and the heart. The heart is a muscle. These 3 areas have GLUT4. GLUT4, insulin activates GLUT4, which brings the GLUT4 receptor to the surface of these cells, which then allows more glucose to come in a lot quicker. So anyway,
Jeff, when are you going to get your PhD in human physiology?
Well, there's a lot more to learn. I learn every day. I study every day. I'll never stop studying. But what I just told you, right?
Yeah.
Just from my brain, freely,
Mm-hmm.
if I can explain this to you, why can't a doctor explain that? Then he'd really know. But he doesn't have a clue about this polyol pathway.
Yeah.
So insulin's trying to shove glucose in the cell. F you. It's not how it works. Yes, like I said, GLUT4 there's that higher insulin response from that carb meal. There's a bunch of glucose around. The liver can only take in so much. The majority does go to skeletal muscle or your fat cells. Yes, that's true because it brings GLUT4 to the surface, which allows a whole lot more glucose in a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
But the polyol pathway, to make it short, I don't know if you want me to explain just a little bit more on that. People might understand this better. The human diet with all this just processed crap, very high carb, very high fat, combined together. Basically, that's what people are eating. Just to make it simple, okay?
Sure.
Anyway, so I'm running on baseline metabolism right now. I haven't eaten yet today.
Me either. Yep.
I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning. I haven't eaten yet. So I'm running on baseline metabolism. I don't wear a glucose monitor, but my blood sugar is probably about between 80 and 85. I'm humming along. Under the basal metabolism there, you probably have between 40 and 50 calories. I like to use calories, but calories worth of glucose, free fatty acids, some ketones, some lactate. And I'm fine talking to you right now, right? I can go walk outside, I'm fine,
Yep.
right? So now I sit down and I eat. Let's just say the worst is high carb plus high fat.
Yeah.
But let's forget
Absolutely.
about, for a second, forget about the fat. I eat a high carb diet, fast acting carbohydrate, a fairly large glucose load. Well, once that goes from the small intestines, the majority goes to the liver first via the liver portal vein.
Yep.
So
Pour open.
the concentration of glucose in the liver is a lot higher than what the liver ends up putting out into the bloodstream. What's in the liver, but what happens in the liver does not stay in the liver.
Mhm.
That the liver cells, that big hit of glucose, that activate the polyol pathway. It's a conserved mechanism.
Yep.
When food was scarce,
Right.
it allowed you to eat this big meal, become insulin resistant. I'll explain in a second, and store all the excess energy stored away in fat, which will then be released later, trafficked out of the fat cells to be used for energy.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful system. Beautiful. Okay, now what I just said, that high carb meal, the blood sugar level gets high enough in the liver. The liver, there's polyol is a two-step process. Converts glucose to sorbitol and
Yep.
then to fructose.
You're right.
Okay. The liver has both enzymes. The rate-limiting first step enzyme, aldose reductase, converts glucose to sorbitol.
Yep.
Second step is the enzyme sorbitol dehydrogenase,
Yep.
converts it to fructose.
Yep.
So what just happened in the liver causes that first enzyme, aldose reductase, the expression of that enzyme, to skyrocket.
Yep.
So now it's making a lot of fructose from that.
It's got to survive that spike of glucose. It's got to do things with it.
The normal polyol pathway, it's there. First of all, I'm going too fast.
Mhm.
It's there because the spermatocytes and the ovaries use fructose as their main fuel. But you don't need to go eat any fructose. It converts 1, 2 to up to 3% of the glucose. Let's say it converts it to fructose via this polyol pathway in the liver. So it's just a tiny drop of fructose, tiny drop, which you make in the liver under normal glycemia.
Sure.
And it's also acts as a sink or as it's like a flux. The glycolysis glucose pathway, it helps like if blood sugars rise a little bit higher. It's like a buffer.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Well,
it
and
also
some similar pathways happen in the brain too. When the glucose spikes so high, the brain can't use that high level. So it goes to sorbitol, it goes to fructose, and then they believe it's what becomes the amyloid plaque that we're seeing in the brains because the brain can't metabolize that fructose, but it can't handle spikes that high of glucose. It's not having its normal even glucose along with its normal even ketones, which is how we're designed to work as you know, as every baby's born and being a fat adapted in nutritional ketosis. And almost everybody lived that way until 120 years ago. This new sugar burning metabolism, we're always hangry, we're always hungry, all of these things that's why our bodies are being destroyed. We're living a shorter lifespan and everything else that goes with it.
now, yeah, 1,000%, 1,000%. Now, what diabetics need to understand. All that diabetic neuropathy that I tried to explain earlier, kidney damage, nerve damage, eye, lens, cataracts.
All the advanced glycation end products.
Well, yeah, thank you. That's what's happening, fructose. Anyway, in the liver, so that higher blood sugar is activating the rate limiting enzyme, aldose reductase. That's the important one. But the liver can convert that to sorbitol and then fructose. Fructose, then the process of the process of using fructose, breaking it apart, one of the end results, you make uric acid. It makes uric acid in the liver. Uric acid goes up. Elevated uric acid also gives an even heavier upregulation of that first enzyme in polyol, aldose reductase. And that uric acid does a lot of damage. It inhibits nitric oxide production, vasodilation for normal blood pressure.
Sure.
So it knocks that out. You become insulin resistant. You have high blood pressure. Now in the liver, that caveman can do what polyol was designed for. Just quickly store away this excess in your fat cells to come back out later to fuel you till your next meal. That's how it was designed. That's what it's, but as I just explained, high carb meal, boom, that hits the liver, blah, blah, blah. Uric acid goes up in the blood. And the blood sugar is already high enough by itself. And those cells that I'm talking about, listening to the ADA with A1C of 7, all by itself.
Yeah.
Those cells don't almost have, they have the first enzyme, aldose reductase,
Yep.
which goes to sorbitol. Sorbitol is used for osmolarity. It controls the amount of water that goes in and out of the cells. It does other stuff too, but the main point I bring that up, these cells and these kidney and so on, they have either zero or very limited levels of that sorbitol dehydrogenase enzyme, the second step.
Yep.
So glucose goes to fructose by the first enzyme,
Sure.
but it stays as sorbitol. And you can only handle so much sorbitol for osmolarity. You know, let's say, I'll say a basal level. Well, they have no way of getting all this excess sorbitol quickly. I'm talking about someone 7%.
Yeah.
The sorbitol builds up in those cells. What I'm explaining depletes ATP in these cells, causes reverse transport in the electron transport chain, protons leaking. It makes proton leak and reverse. You get a lot of reaction. ROS, reactive oxygen species, oxygen stress, and you get what's called osmotic stress because you can't clear that sorbitol fast enough in those cells. And that's where all the damage comes in. To damage all these cells. That does all the damage. Say, and listen, I hope people pay attention because it causes all the damage in diabetic neuropathy, the myelin sheath of the Schwann cells get damaged, nerve damage, diabetic neuropathy, diabetic kidney disease.
This is going to be the next podcast that Dr. Cooley and I do together on the metabochondriacs, the 40 things that advanced glycation end products wind up doing inside of your body, and it's all of what you're describing right here.
But the biggest mistake that these people probably make when you, like, if you bring that up to these people, these well-educated, well-meaning doctors, right? That these type, they probably know about the polyol pathway, but and I'm saying that the blood sugars in those cells are already high enough
Yeah.
to upregulate. It upregulates polyol pathway from about 3% to 35%. So like tenfold
Mm-hmm.
goes to fructose from glucose. But what they don't realize is the part that I explained when it hits the liver, how the blood sugar level is a lot higher in the liver than in the bloodstream.
Yep.
So just that by itself, I think that would be like the start. Like, you know how, an example of what I'm trying to say, like Ben Bickman, a very well respected researcher, and the guy knows his shit.
Yep.
Okay. What I'm trying to explain in the liver, I'm talking about like a non-diabetic even there. If I'd have a 20-year-old son, as an example, and he eats this horrible diet, polyol gets activated. It's not activated. It gets activated in the liver, and it does all this damage. It depletes NAD to NADH ratio,
Yep.
which then depletes our master antioxidant, glutathione.
Glutathione. Yeah.
It does all these things, and these people have no clue it's doing that. He thinks he's eating a healthy diet. This keeps on going on. And
It's
anyway, the part I
it's the train wreck. It's the train wreck that just becomes all of the metabolic health issues that we're suffering from. Let me pull you back for just a quick second,
yeah,
because it's incredible your knowledge. And I first want to make an overarching statement of where you're saying, oh, well, I had this back surgery. My doctor said something. I didn't know how to react to it. I'm a common laborer. I'm a tool and die person. I do all these different things. I don't know anything about medical. I think the average doctor would have had his head spinning trying to listen to you go through what you're going through right now, because it's not touched on. Most of it's not touched on, or at least I'll say the dots are not connected. They have to learn anatomy. They have to learn the electron transport chain, the Krebs cycle, glycolysis in the first complex, beta oxidation in the second, APTase in the fifth. But then once they pass that test, they never have to think about it again, because they're never taught the basics of true metabolism and this new metabolism that the world, or at least the Western world, lives within the last 50 to 100 years. And they're not taught anything to do with that aspect of what they don't even know, that there's a fat adapted and a sugar basis to metabolism, that almost everybody's living outside of our native metabolism. Thus almost all of our reference labs or reference ranges on our labs are so skewed, because we got to go back to what they were 40, 50 years ago, when we were generally a healthy population, not a wildly sick, off base population. But so with having just kind of laid that out there, first of all, beyond that, thinking back to 2008, 2007, before your whole weight loss transformation, do you ever just stop in the mirror or look at an old picture and recognize yourself? And also, with where it's obvious that this is your passion, and biochemistry, physiology, and all of this stuff you are just so into. I find myself, I keep saying all the time, if I was seeing myself talking and listening and being able to keep up with what you're talking about right here 7, 8 years ago, not only would I not recognize myself physically, I don't even know who I am anymore, because I don't watch Packer games anymore. I watch science presentations like yourself, read studies, and follow people like Ben Bickman, Folig Vinny, and the world. Stepping back and just kind of thinking about how you're obviously so consumed with all this. What do you think about all of that?
Well, I don't know. I'm just kind of weird, probably. Uh,
No, we all have inner geek, but you figured out how to tap into it where you never did before, or you geeked out on other things. We
yeah,
all have things that we pay attention to, and
yeah,
there are people that won't pay attention to any of this, but they know everything that happens on a motorcycle, and they
yeah.
can take rebuild. So we all have our own specialty areas,
That's
uh,
true.
of what we pay attention to. But I guess also maybe my question is more of, did you ever think that you had the mental capacity to get into this level, this geekiness of what we always reserve to those white coat people, those doctors and those PhDs, compared to the world that you used to live in?
No, I never thought I'd learn this stuff. I had no interest in learning any of this. It meant nothing to me, you know. But the path that I followed led me to learn, and then I had to learn more, and I just could never learn enough. I still have a whole lot to learn. I'll never stop. But like I never took any college courses or courses online. What I'm explaining to you, I read that I learned that mostly through reading research paper on certain topics, and I always one thing led to that, that leads to something. I followed that, and it had to make sense to me. Like I started, you might think this is crazy, but when I started learning about this stuff, and I read that paper, Insulin and its Metabolic Effects, not far behind that, I already started really deep reading research papers on Professor Roger Unger, all his work in diabetes and glucagon. These guys work at University of uh, Southern Texas, in Dallas, Texas. Big diabetes research people. You've got people like Dr. Phil Shear
Yeah.
that discovered the hormone adiponectin, 1995. And he's been researching and studying diabetes, adiponectin, leptin, everything. You know, makes a long, long, long time. He's written many, 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 many research papers just on adiponectin, all these fatty acid metabolism, on and on. Well, I read most of his papers. I've read most of Professor Unger's papers. I've read a lot of uh, so many different, ones. Holland, Scott Summers on ceramides, saturated fatty acid ceramide, which a lot of people don't know about. It's
Mm-hmm.
called it's called the ceramide centric view of insulin resistance. It had personal fat threshold type 2 diabetes. It has all to do with that. It has to do with adiponectin and leptin. And
Yep.
I can go on and on, but the thing is, I was never satisfied at just this here. Like, it's carbohydrate insulin model. No, no, it's personal fat threshold. It's this, it's this. Okay, I'm going to study all these things. I'm
Yep.
going to go really deep. And to be totally honest with you, and I'm not joking, I view myself as a person that really knows not much at all. And so I always continue to study and research and on, and it'll never stop. So that's
I
just
can hear you. I've got a similar bug to you with a lot of that as well. I can't believe the amount of time that I put into, reading, listen. I've just now started kind of a number of the books, because one of my first mistakes when I first got into this, because I was a traveling salesperson, I was always on the road. So I always would buy on my phone or on the computer, the Kindle version of these books, so that they were just always with me, and I had them. I could read them on the plane, in the hotel, wherever I was. But now I want them to not only to use as a backdrop, but to be able to share with people and to be able to, when I want to reference a book, just like you were talking about Folick and Vinny, and I'm like, yes, to me, this is the Bible of understanding ketosis right here. You want to really start somewhere, you can start and come close to ending it right there. But then you start adding on with, like you said, Dr. Bickman and where he's going with it. Let me pull you out again 20,000 feet one more time. And reflecting on all of this. So obviously you and I think would both agree there's a lot of ways people can lose weight. I put on weight, you put on weight. We've both lost more than a couple people's worth of weight between the two of us. We've lost like 4 people worth of weight between the two of us. But with all of that, you've also, after that weight, and you did drop your A1C from 12 to a 6, still in the pre-diabetic range on that whole food plant-based diet. But then you go low carb and you drop it down to a 4.9. And now for like the last, 10 years, you've made 10, 12 years, maintain that high 4s of an A1C by going low carb, by leveraging ketosis. You were still, struggling with the elevated liver enzymes and that liver condition, and the low carb knocked that out, where they were talking about there is no cure for this type of a condition or situation. The brain fog's gone, the depression's gone. Am I missing any of the other major things that kind of triggered and happened as of going low carb? And then just to kind of make it a simple thing, share a couple of what your normal meals are, as far as, because people like to always knock on keto and low carb, saying this is not sustainable. And they try, and where you talk about, we damage the type 2 and type 1s by telling them, eat whatever you want, just bolus enough insulin to do it. And they don't understand how we're rotting out the body with these high glycation levels, creating all these different mechanisms of what you were just going through, the advanced glycation and everything that the body has to do to try to stay on top of that. So one, did I miss any conditions that since you went low carb that you were able to reverse that I didn't make note of?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
And so talk before we get into kind of philosophy stuff. Talk about what, you say you're very regimented with your meals. Are you talking you do 4, 5, 6 meals all over the time? 1, 2, 3 meals? What are your most common meals?
Well, first is animal protein.
Yeah.
I probably eat at like 0.7, 0.8 grams of animal protein per pound of lean body mass.
Yeah.
So I always have animal protein, eggs. Eggs, I eat about 50 eggs a week.
Okay. That for the average person just stumbling upon all of this, that would be shocking for most people to eat.
Yeah, eggs does not cause type 2 diabetes.
No, it
In
cures
fact,
it.
Animal protein, a lot of eggs too. The only vegetables I'll have is broccoli. Really, broccoli.
You usually cooked or steamed, or do you eat it raw ever?
No, it's not raw.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's just steamed.
Yep.
No more than maybe 10 grams of carbohydrate per day.
Yep.
And I use some virgin coconut oil
Yep.
because 50% of virgin coconut oil has the saturated fat C12,
Yep.
lauric acid,
Yep.
and you won't find that in animal protein. I use it for specific reasons with the liver.
Yep.
I won't get into all that but
Sure.
anyway, normal normal foods, extra virgin olive oil. But can I just say something about saturated fat?
Absolutely. Yes, please do.
Okay. When you overeat, you know how people are terrified of saturated fat. Well, first of all, there's different saturated fatty acids. But the main reason why these vegans, or I'll call them vegan doc, not to put anybody down, the reason that they live in fear of saturated fat, there's a specific saturated fatty acid called C16 palmitic or C16 palmitate. Well, C16 palmitate, that's the substrate needed to make saturated fatty acid ceramides.
Okay.
Now, ceramides are sphingolipids. They're a form of it's a fat-derived molecule. There's a couple thousand in the body. But ceramide and the opposing one, S1P, they're very well studied. Anyway, ceramide is the substrate used to make the saturated fatty acid ceramides de novo in the liver. It can also be made via another pathway that you'll hear Ben Bickman talk about,
Right.
the inflammatory pathway. But I'm more interested in the de novo production in the liver.
Creation of.
Yeah. So that ceramide, excess ceramides causes insulin resistance. It's a metabolic messenger. It doesn't affect the very first stage of the insulin pathway. A couple stages downstream, and it inhibits the AKT pathway. And that AKT pathway is what is needed to activate the GLUT4 insulin receptor on muscle cells.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much wipes that out. And it does a lot of things, but I'm talking about two main things. It's in the liver, the FOXO1 enzyme in the liver that regulates the speed of liver gluconeogenesis. Okay? Usually that runs at a basal rate, liver gluconeogenesis, a low basal rate. AKT inhibits FOXO1 in the liver. And the enzymes there's two enzymes that regulate the rate, the speed of liver GNG. Those two enzymes, that AKT pathway, the FOXO1, those enzymes are not controlled properly. So the rate of GNG more or less runs uncontrolled, very upregulated in the liver. Type 2 diabetics. Insulin resistance, what I'm explaining, it's called selective insulin resistance. But anyway, the liver becomes a glucose producing factory. So you'll have a type 2 diabetic. Anyway, I'm going too far. I don't want to get into too many things, but try to simplify. You have this thing that's called the ceramide, which you need palmitate to make it. But you also need to activate the first enzyme, SPT, to make ceramide. And that's turned on by high-carb diets, higher insulin, low-carb diet. That SPT gets kind of knocked down and you use the fat to burn. Yep. So there's this thermostat in the human body. It's called the ceramide S1P rheostat or thermostat. And what that does, it activates a ceramidase activity, which converts the excess ceramides to the opposing sphingolipid or fat-derived molecule, the short abbreviation S1P. Excess ceramide causes insulin resistance via the pathways that I just explained. Others too, but it does that. So it makes that rheostat regulates that. So there's only so many ceramides and a certain amount of S1P. It's like a seesaw. S1P has the opposing effects. Ceramide is very pro-inflammatory, causes insulin resistance, increases the rate of cell death, apoptosis.
Right.
S1P does the exact opposite. Very anti-inflammatory. This is in all cells, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm explaining. And just one thing, S1P is trafficked in the system by HDL. Just throwing that in there.
Mm-hmm.
So really that's, let's call it background, or they're metabolic messengers at the second or third step causing all this insulin resistance. And the reason I'm bringing that up, these vegan docs want you to eat a high carb diet. Most of the excess carbohydrate in the liver is very readily, very easily converted to, guess what? C16 palmitate, saturated fatty acid. That's the substrate needed to make ceramide de novo in the liver. 80% of the ceramides are made in the liver. They're deposited in liver cells, which causes insulin resistance, but they're also incorporated into the VLDL molecule used in the production of triglycerides in the liver. Then they're trafficked out. The VLDL molecule is two different sizes, VLDL1, VLDL2. VLDL2 is just a normal size triglyceride pore. VLDL1, it's much larger in diameter. It's full of, guess what? Ceramide. It's full of C16 saturated fatty acid palmitate. Now, that's trafficked out.
But not from ingested food, from created as a byproduct of what's going on.
Yeah, now I need to go just a little bit further, so this makes more sense to you why I brought it up in the first place. Your fat stores and your liver, there's a constant crosstalk. It's all in the muscles. It's all regulated. Adiponectin, in normal people, it's high. There's two adiponectin receptors which make your cells sensitive to insulin. That's what makes all your cells sensitive to insulin. And adiponectin needs to activate both receptors to activate AMPK and another pathway in the liver, PPAR alpha, that increases fatty acid oxidation and glucose oxidation, regulates liver gluconeogenesis via FOXO1, what I was explaining. The rate, the speed of GNG in the liver, now it's the way it's supposed to be. very low, normal, basal level.
And constant.
Okay? So people need to understand that, you hear people say, well, gluconeogenesis is demand driven. It is. But what I'm trying to explain now, it's no longer demand driven. Now it's out of control, GNG. Now you've got type 2 diabetics that. So anyway, ceramides in the liver, what happens, the adiponectin and leptin released by your fat cells. Once your fat cells become too hypertrophic, too large in diameter, from the excess energy from food, that's where insulin, they become hypertrophic, inflamed, very insulin resistant. Insulin can no longer control the rate of fatty acids coming out. And it changes the production and the ratio of secretion from the fat cells where it's made, adiponectin. The level of adiponectin goes way down. Leptin goes up. But forget about leptin there. That's adiponectin. It changes not only the total plasma level of adiponectin in circulation, which regulates all this stuff in the liver and the fat cells. It changes. There's 3 different molecular weights of adiponectin: low, medium, and high. You measure someone's adiponectin, someone who's insulin sensitive, a lean, metabolically healthy person. You measure their adiponectin, they're going to have normal levels of total adiponectin, nice and high. And most of the adiponectin is going to be the high molecular weight. Adipose tissue hyperplasia, hypertrophic cells, what I just explained. It changes the production of high molecular weight to low molecular weight. You need the high molecular weight form of adiponectin to activate both receptors in the liver and fat cells and muscle cells. It makes all cells, it's pro-survival, makes them all, slows down the rate of cell death. Insulin sensitivity, that's what makes the cells sensitive to insulin. The receptors from adiponectin. So when that goes down, the change in adiponectin, you don't have the high molecular weight form to activate both receptors. So now, the ceramides that I explained, okay, you no longer have that ceramide S1P rheostat activating that ceramidase activity, which regulates that seesaw in the blood of saturated fatty acid ceramide to the opposing sphingolipid, sphingosine 1 phosphatase, S1P. So, and I'll back up. Insulin is not shoving glucose anywhere into cells. And I'm bringing that back up because I see that a lot in diabetic forums, or I'm not going to name names of people, but popular doctors that love to say insulin is driving glucose into the cell. Hopefully, from what I explained earlier on the GLUT1 and GLUT2 and GLUT4 transporters, what I've explained, you may have to go back and listen back. But again, insulin helps to facilitate the uptake of glucose. It does other things too. It couples.
It's a master hormone. It does many things.
No, but I'm talking more how your basal glucose transport works.
Yeah.
And the actual damage, the three biggest things in type 1, type 2 diabetes: diabetic neuropathy, diabetic retinopathy, the eye, the cataracts, and I'm missing one. Anyway, they think that it's because insulin can't shove glucose into the cells anymore. Cells are all stuffed and they're full. The glucose molecule itself, I don't care if it's 300, what I explained, polyol pathway, the activation, that's what's doing the damage. And most folks don't have a clue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that, to be.
Well, it's the sad, just to kind of bring it again back out to a 10,000-foot view, the amount that is not covered in med school, nursing school, dietitian school about what's really going on inside of our metabolism, inside of our quantum biology, inside of our circadian biology. This is all Greek to what you graduate from med school and now you're supposed to go out. They're only taught, I don't want to say they're only taught because that cheapens it way too much. And not knocking on any doctor here, they go to med school, they have to pass the test that they're given. But they're not given so much information that helps people. If suddenly, instead of using the word, and this is my big salt box of the last couple months, idiopathic, everything for diagnosis, DRG codes, CPT codes, everything doctors have to do to get paid, they have to diagnose you with something. Once you start teaching what I'm saying is missing in the med schools, suddenly, you have insulin resistance driven type 2 diabetes. You have this from what Jeff is just talking about, from what's happening here. I believe the malice in all of this is that, and the reason we use idiopathic hypertension, diabetes, and all these things, because once you start realizing, if people just go back to eat how most people ate from the 1900 to the previous 2,000 years before that, everything goes away. This is an insulin resistance. Well, how do we fix insulin resistance? We stop carb loading. We stop doing all the damage of what our officials have told us to do with the dietary guidelines. And, it's so frustrating. There's so much cognitive dissonance that happens within a doctor to overcome and open their eyes and take the blinders off and see what, you just went through almost 2 hours of a lot of heavy duty biochem situation going through in all of this. But again, it can be obviously not just simplified to say, eat a reasonable amount of carbs, eat enough animal protein, don't fear animal fat. And you're going to, it can be boiled down to that amount of a statement, because most people, they look at what I and you have invested our time into trying to getting our brains around. And right now they don't have but 3 hours a week to, that they're going to spend in front of or 3 hours a night in front of the TV when they come home from work. And that's all the bandwidth that they have for anything. So if you were going to make it a real super simple message, what would your super simple message be for the average person who, yourself in 2006, before you started going down this whole pathway, instead of finding Barnhart's vegetarian, vegan type of a book, if you had to say in 1 to 2 to 3 sentences, what is the easiest way for the average person to overcome all of these things from a dietary approach, what would it be?
Well, I tell them, first of all, remove all processed junk foods that people eat today. Remove all of it. Like 90% of the stuff in the grocery store, you got to take that out. Take out the soda pop. Eat whole food. You want to eat animal protein. Use some healthy fats. no seed oils. I would only eat carbohydrate from fibrous veggies.
The
Because
cruciferous type.
that's not going to do what I was explaining in the polyol pathway when it hits the liver. None of that's going to do what I explained.
Mm-hmm.
You're knocking that out there. You don't have to worry about that constant overactivation anymore in the liver of that polyol pathway. That's gone. And try and do some form of daily exercise. Whatever you like to do, you don't do something you hate because you won't do it.
Yep, got to do what you'll do.
I'm trying to think of anything else, but I think doing just that, it's going to go along. It'll go a long way.
Try to focus in on sleep and getting proper sleep and
Um,
consistent times of rising and sleeping.
and I'll say too, you hear you read about all these stories, your story, my story, his story. It's all a different story. It's that person's own individual journey, what he had to go through. So don't think you have to listen to that guy and eat word for word. And if he's eating that way, it might be a little bit different for you. So you have to fine tune this stuff. So I measure fasting triglycerides, alt and AST, uric acid, A1C, I guess if you want to, that'll give.
So some people, when they're long-term, low carb, keto, they can actually start coming back up with the A1C a little bit. And that's more of a residency issue that as you do that, your red blood cells live beyond the 90 days and just even at the low level of glucose in the body, if it's now 110, 120 day life, they're still going to show a little bit more glycation than a shorter living cell. So that can happen with some people.
And put another way, a diabetic listening to the ADA, 7%. They're running constant high glucose. Those red blood cells are going to die off much faster, like in 90 days. So when you do what you said, you normalize glucose, they're not being killed off as fast anymore. They're not being killed off at 90 days. I'm saying that wrong. The shelf life or
right.
It's no longer 90 days.
Yep. So if it's even going to live in a perfect amount of glucose, because we do need that perfect amount of glucose that we'll create all by herself without eating a grain of sugar or anything that will metabolize to it, you're going to be safe. You're going to be good. You're going to be able to generate the results that Jeff has done on his journey. You're going to be able to generate the results, but that I've done on my journey and millions of others around the world. And you just got to find the way, like you said, exercise, do what you will like and enjoy doing. Find the foods in this way of eating that you will enjoy. They're beautiful. They're tasteful. There's nothing as tasty. And the reason why sugar had to be put in everything is because we took fat out of everything. And fat is where all the flavor in the world was. And that's why sugar had to be put in to keep food palatable after we removed all the fat. Well, Jeff, I can't thank you enough for giving me 2 hours of your day today. And I am just so thoroughly impressed with the amount of information and the rabbit holes and the science that, as a guy who didn't go to college to study all of this kind of stuff, and you are into it all right now, it is mind-numbing. I get it because I geek out too. I think you take geeking out to a longer level, but you've been doing it for a lot longer than I have. You started really going down this probably around 2009-ish, 11. In that period of time is where you went down the rabbit hole. I've got a long way to go because my rabbit hole opened up for me in 2018 in October. So,
like I said, it's just a process. The learning process never ends. It just
Absolutely.
continues. Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, hang on just a second there. So, guys, I'm going to sign off really quick. And thanks everybody for joining us at the My Metabolic Life podcast channel. Jeff, real quick, is there any place else? Well, you have your Facebook page. And let me just really quick show for people who haven't seen it yet. Share screen. And let me pick now the monitor. This one right here. So this is coming up on the screen here now is going to be it's waiting to come up, and or it was that screen active. It went away for a quick second, but just to see Jeff before, because it is a heck of a transformation. Nope, that's different Jeff Sear.
Huh.
Oh, I'm sorry. The one up on top. There's multiple of you out there.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm recording, things run quite slow. So here's Jeff. Here's a picture of Jeff with all the extra weight pre. Now it's about 173 that it was at that time.
Now my weight on that picture was probably about, like, let's say 340.
Quite a radical. 345, and you're in the 170 range now.
Well, 175. It plays between like 176 to 182.
Okay, excellent. So I'm now going to quick stop sharing that. So anyhow, everybody, thank you so much for joining us here today. And Jeff, we can bring you back and you can start teaching some PhD courses on all of this stuff pretty soon. Yeah. And we can do a whole metabolic health university just focused on you going through all the different pathways.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for having me on, Brett.
It was an extreme pleasure. You have a great day. Hold on, don't disappear.